In the quiet suburb of Frederick, Colorado, the Watts family seemed picture-perfect. Chris and Shanann Watts lived in a spacious home, raising their two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. Shanann, an energetic mother, was active on social media, where she proudly shared moments of family life. Her posts showed a devoted husband and two smiling children, making it appear that everything was in harmony. Friends and relatives admired the couple's image, believing their bond was strong. But behind those Instagram smiles, tension was quietly growing. No one outside their walls could have predicted what was coming. And soon, the illusion of happiness would be shattered forever. On the morning of August 13, 2018, Shanann returned home from a business trip. She was 15 weeks pregnant with their third child, a baby boy. Friends had noticed that Shanann seemed unusually worried in the days leading up to that night. She confided about feeling distant from Chris, uncertain about his behavior. Yet she pushed forward, hoping their marriage could heal. But by that same morning, Shanann and the girls had vanished without explanation. Her phone, wallet, and car were all still at home. Panic spread quickly. Something was terribly wrong, and her friends didn't hesitate to sound the alarm. Shanann's best friend, Nicole Atkinson, was the first to sense danger. She had dropped Shanann off late the night before and was supposed to hear from her that morning. When Shanann didn't answer calls or messages, Nicole drove to the Watts' home. She saw Shanann's car in the driveway, yet no one answered the door. Uneasy, she contacted Chris and later called the police. Within hours, officers arrived at the property, beginning what seemed like a simple welfare check. But what they found raised even more questions. Shanann's belongings were untouched, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. When police arrived, Chris appeared surprisingly calm. He allowed them inside, showing them the empty rooms. Shanann's purse was still there, her shoes by the door. Nothing suggested she had left on her own. Chris spoke softly, telling officer that maybe Shanann had gone to visit a friend. But something about his tone felt off, detached, almost rehearsed. Neighbors watched from across the street, whispering to each other. One would later say Chris looked far too relaxed for a man whose pregnant wife and two little girls were missing. The first cracks in the perfect image were beginning to show. The case quickly gained media attention. Reporters swarmed the quiet neighborhood, cameras flashing. As Chris stood on his porch giving interviews, he pleaded for Shanann and the girls to come home. His words sounding carefully chosen. "If you're out there, just come back," he told the cameras. Yet those who knew Shanann felt uneasy watching him. His body language seemed strange. His arms crossed, his face tight, his eyes avoiding the lens. To the world, he was a worried father and husband. But to investigators, something about his performance didn't quite match the reality of the situation. As the search intensified, Shanann's friends and family flooded social media with desperate pleas. They knew she would never leave willingly, especially with the children. She had always been a devoted mother, her life revolving around Bella and Celeste. Detectives began interviewing neighbors, combing through hours of surveillance footage. One neighbor came forward with home security video, showing Chris backing his truck into the driveway early that morning. An unusual move for someone supposedly heading to work. Why was he loading his truck in the dark? That detail would soon become crucial in unraveling the mystery. Inside the house, investigators noticed small things that didn't add up. Shanann's wedding ring had been left on the nightstand. Her phone was found stuffed between the couch cushions, still active. The children's beloved blankets, which they never slept without, were gone. Detectives began to wonder, had Shanann taken the girls somewhere, or had something darker happened overnight? Every minute that passed made the situation more urgent. Still, Chris insisted he had no idea where his family could be. But as pressure mounted, his carefully built story began to crumble. Behind the scenes, investigators started digging into Chris's personal life. They discovered he had recently grown distant, avoiding Shanann's calls while she was on her trip. Friends recalled her voicing suspicions that something wasn't right between them. She felt he was pulling away emotionally, even as she carried their third child. To the outside world, it seemed like a family under stress, nothing more. But detectives weren't convinced. A husband's detachment during a missing persons case rarely bodes well. And with each passing day, Chris's behavior was beginning to draw even more scrutiny. The media frenzy only added fuel to the fire. Images of Shanann and the girls spread across every news outlet, capturing the hearts of strangers nationwide. Social media exploded with theories. Had she run away? Had she been kidnapped? Or was there something Chris wasn't saying? Meanwhile, Shanann's parents and friends held press conferences, their voices trembling with grief and fear. They spoke of her warmth, her love for her children, her excitement about the new baby. To them, one thing was certain: Shanann would never abandon her family. The focus was slowly tightening on Chris himself. As suspicions grew, investigators called Chris in for questioning. His answers remained vague, his story shifting slightly each time he spoke. Detectives noticed inconsistencies, little details that didn't align with the evidence. Body language experts later pointed out his nervous gestures, his shallow breathing, his tendency to avoid eye contact. But the breakthrough would come not from his words, but from science. Police requested that Chris take a polygraph test, something most innocent people would welcome. What happened next would mark a turning point in the case, pushing the investigation toward a chilling truth. The polygraph test was a turning point. Chris walked into the room confident, but within minutes, his calm exterior began to crack. The examiner's questions grew sharper. Did you physically harm Shanann? Do you know where your daughters are right now? His answers were quiet, almost whispered, but the machine caught every tremor. By the end, there was no doubt. The examiner leaned forward and told Chris directly, "You failed the test." His face tightened. The mask he had worn for days was beginning to fall apart. Detectives wasted no time. They told Chris the results and pressed him harder than ever. "You know what happened," one investigator said, his voice firm. Chris shifted in his seat, his eyes darting to the floor. He denied at first, repeating the same story. Shanann must have left, maybe with the kids. But his words no longer sounded convincing. Each pause, each nervous gesture betrayed him. Investigators knew they were close to breaking through. It was only a matter of time before his carefully constructed lie collapsed. Behind the scenes, the investigation was uncovering crucial evidence. Surveillance footage from a neighbor showed Chris backing his truck into the driveway before dawn. That simple act was out of place, and investigators couldn't ignore it. Forensic experts examined the house and found signs that didn't fit Chris's version of events. At the same time, they uncovered something even more damning: phone records and secret communications with another woman. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was beginning to look like motive, and motive meant something terrible had happened. The other woman was a co-worker, someone Chris had been seeing for weeks in secret. Their relationship was more serious than he admitted, and police believed it had become the center of his double life. Shanann had sensed something was wrong, confiding to friends that her marriage felt fragile. But no one imagined how far things had gone. Now, detectives pieced it together. A man living two lives, a family in the way of his fantasy, and a desperate attempt to hide it. Still, Chris remained silent about where his wife and daughters were. The interrogation grew more intense. Detectives alternated between firm accusations and quiet appeals. They reminded Chris of his daughters, of Shanann, of the baby boy they were expecting. "This is your chance to do the right thing," they urged. His composure was slipping, his breathing shallow, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. At times, he buried his face in his hands, shaking his head. But he wasn't ready to admit the truth. It was as if he was fighting a battle with himself, one he was slowly losing. Then came the moment investigators had planned. They brought Chris's father into the room, hoping he might open up to someone familiar. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Chris's shoulders sagged as his father asked quietly, "What happened, son?" There was a long pause, silence so heavy it seemed to fill the room. And then Chris's voice broke. In fragments, halting and raw, he began to say that Shanann was gone. His words stumbled over each other, incomplete, but chilling enough to change everything. Chris claimed, at first, that it had been Shanann who harmed the children. He said he had walked in, panicked, and reacted in anger. Investigators listened carefully, noting how his story twisted to shift blame away from himself. But they weren't fooled. They knew the evidence told another story, one that pointed directly at Chris. His attempt to soften the truth only made his confession more disturbing. The reality of what he was admitting settled in. Shanann and the girls were not missing. They were dead. The chilling confession didn't end there. Detectives pressed for details, and Chris revealed where they could find his family. He had driven them to a remote oil field where he worked, hidden away from the world. Shanann's body had been left in a shallow grave. His daughters, Bella and Celeste, had been placed inside massive oil tanks. The investigators were stunned. The story that had captured the nation's sympathy was unraveling into one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. Back in the interrogation room, Chris sat motionless, drained, as if the weight of his secret had finally crushed him. He spoke in a flat tone, almost detached, describing the unthinkable as though it were routine. Detectives recorded every word, their faces hardening with anger and disbelief. The man who had begged on television for his family's return had just admitted to destroying them. And yet, in his mind, he clung to the idea that his version of events might somehow lessen his guilt. The truth was far darker. With his confession, the investigation reached its horrifying climax. Police rushed to the oil site and recovered the bodies exactly where Chris had said. The perfect family image had been shattered, replaced by a nightmare beyond comprehension. The world now knew the truth. Chris Watts had murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann, and his daughters Bella and Celeste. It was the shocking twist no one wanted to believe, but it was undeniable. The father, who seemed so calm, so loving, had committed the unthinkable crime that stunned the entire world. If this case left you speechless, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next story we uncover. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. You never know which hidden truth we'll reveal next. The Chris Watts case is one of the darkest reminders that evil can hide behind the most ordinary smiles. A picture-perfect family turned into a nightmare. But what do you think drove him to commit such a horrific act? Was it pure selfishness or something deeper in his psychology? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe and stay curious.